The encounter. A stranger in chains. The neon lights of Orion 5 spaceport flickered under the dark, polluted sky. The place smelled of oil, metal, and desperation. Ethan Kane, a lone traveler, walked through the crowded streets, his hands tucked into the pockets of his worn-out jacket. He had seen many things in this lawless part of the galaxy, but nothing prepared him for what he saw next. Down a narrow alley, hidden between rusty cargo containers, a group of alien traders stood in a circle, laughing cruelly. Ethan stopped, his sharp eyes narrowing. He had learned to mind his own business, but something felt wrong. Then he saw her. A woman, not human, sat on the cold metal floor, her hands bound by thick, glowing chains. Her skin was a pale silver, her long dark hair matted with dirt, and her eyes, bright violet, filled with silent pain. Ethan's stomach twisted. He had heard stories about the black market trade of rare species, but seeing it with his own eyes made his blood boil. One of the traders, a large, greasy alien with 4 arms, kicked the woman's side. "You should be grateful," he sneered. "Soon, a rich buyer will take you, and you'll be more than just a runaway freak." The woman didn't cry out. She didn't even flinch. She just stared at the ground, her eyes empty. Ethan clenched his fists. "Walk away, Kane," a voice in his head warned. "This isn't your fight." But something inside him refused to listen. A dangerous decision. Ethan stepped closer. "How much for her?" he asked, his voice casual. The aliens turned, surprised. One of them, a slimy-skinned creature with sharp yellow teeth, grinned. "You got credits, human." Ethan pulled out a small pouch of currency chips, tossing it to the trader. "Enough." The greasy alien laughed. "Not even close. She's special. Last of her kind." His smile turned wicked. "But maybe we can make a deal. You seem strong. Maybe you fight for her." Ethan's heart pounded. This was bad. Really bad. But he had already stepped in, and there was no turning back now. A fight in the shadows. Before Ethan could respond, the largest trader lunged at him, swinging a thick metal club. Ethan ducked, his instincts kicking in. He grabbed a nearby pipe and blocked the next blow, the impact sending pain through his arm. The crowd around them cheered. To them, this was entertainment. The next attacker came fast, a blade flashing in the dim light. Ethan dodged and slammed his elbow into the alien's ribs. Another trader jumped on his back, trying to choke him, but Ethan spun and threw him off. His breath was heavy. His body ached. But he wasn't done. With a sudden burst of strength, he kicked the leader's knees, sending him crashing down. The others hesitated. They weren't expecting him to fight this hard. Ethan wiped the blood from his lip and pointed at the chained woman. "She's mine now." Silence. Then the leader spat at the ground. "Take her," he growled. "She's cursed anyway." Ethan didn't waste time. He rushed to the woman's side, using his knife to cut the bindings. Up close, he saw the scars on her wrists, marks of long years of suffering. "You're safe now," he whispered. She looked up at him, those violet eyes filled with something he couldn't name. Hope, fear, disbelief. Then, a sudden voice made his blood run cold. "They won't let you leave alive, human." Ethan turned. More men were coming, armed, fast, and ready to kill. The real fight had just begun. The escape, running from the shadows. Ethan didn't have time to think. The moment he cut the glowing chains from the alien woman's wrists, a loud alarm blared across the spaceport. The traders had called for backup. More men were coming, armed, dangerous, ready to kill. The woman looked up at him, her violet eyes widening. Even in her weakened state, she understood. They had to run. Now. Ethan grabbed her wrist. "Can you walk?" She nodded, but when she tried to stand, her legs gave out. Ethan cursed under his breath. There was no time to ask questions. He threw her arm over his shoulder and ran. Behind them, angry voices shouted. Heavy boots pounded against the metal ground. Ethan didn't dare look back. They reached the main street, crowded, chaotic, filled with people from every corner of the galaxy. Ethan weaved through them, hoping the mass of bodies would slow their pursuers. But when he glanced over his shoulder, his stomach twisted. The bounty hunters were already spreading out, searching. Then, the worst happened. An announcement echoed across the spaceport. Attention, all travelers. A runaway slave and a human fugitive have been spotted. A reward of 50,000 credits for their capture, dead or alive. The entire street fell silent. Then, like sharks drawn to blood, everyone turned to look at Ethan and the alien woman. The chase begins. Ethan had been in bad situations before, but this was something else. Now, it wasn't just the bounty hunters chasing them. Every mercenary, thief, and desperate drifter in the spaceport wanted their heads. A group of thugs rushed toward them, grinning like hungry wolves. Ethan pushed the woman forward. Run. She stumbled but forced herself to move, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Ethan shoved crates, knocked over barrels, anything to slow them down. But it wasn't enough. A shot rang out. A laser bolt barely missed his head. They sprinted toward the lower docks, where Ethan's small ship was hidden. But before they could reach the exit, a massive figure stepped in front of them. It was Drek Volm, a bounty hunter known across the system. His massive reptilian body was covered in armor-like scales, and his red cybernetic eye glowed in the dim light. "You made a mistake, human," Drek growled. "Hand over the girl, and I might let you live." Ethan's grip on his blaster tightened. "No deal." Drek chuckled. "I was hoping you'd say that." With a roar, the bounty hunter lunged forward. The woman's power. Ethan fired his blaster, but Drek was fast. Too fast. The reptilian brute dodged, swinging a massive clawed hand toward Ethan's throat. Ethan barely ducked in time, feeling the air whoosh past his head. Then something unexpected happened. The alien woman, the one Ethan had just rescued, moved. Faster than a blink, she raised her hand. And suddenly, Drek froze in place. His entire body stiffened, as if invisible chains had wrapped around him. His cybernetic eye flickered wildly. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Ethan's breath caught. What? The woman's violet eyes glowed. A strange, humming energy filled the air. Then she whispered something, a word Ethan didn't understand. Drek let out a horrifying scream, his massive body collapsing like a puppet with cut strings. The bounty hunter twitched once, then went completely still. The crowd, the mercenaries, the bounty hunters, they all hesitated. Everyone had thought the woman was just a runaway slave. But now, they were terrified of her. She turned to Ethan, her face pale, her body swaying. Whatever she had done, it had taken everything she had left. "We need to go," she whispered, voice shaking. Ethan didn't argue. He grabbed her hand, pulled her forward, and they disappeared into the shadows, just as the alarms blared louder. They had escaped, for now, but every hunter in the galaxy now wanted them dead. A past filled with pain. Lyra's truth. The small cargo ship rattled as it left Orion 5's toxic atmosphere. Ethan barely had time to breathe before setting the autopilot and turning to face the woman he had risked his life for. She sat in the co-pilot's chair, her body tense, her violet eyes staring at the stars outside. The aftershock of her mysterious power was still visible. Her hands trembled slightly. Her breaths were uneven. Ethan leaned against the console, arms crossed. "All right. I think it's time we talk." She didn't respond. "Who are you?" he asked again, his voice calm but firm. "And what the hell did you do back there?" For a moment, silence filled the cabin. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "My name is Lyra." Ethan exhaled. At least he had a name now. And the bounty hunters, the slavers, why were they so desperate to keep you? Lyra's fingers curled into fists. "Because I'm not supposed to exist. A secret worth killing for, Ethan frowned. Not supposed to exist. Lyra closed her eyes, as if searching for the right words. My people, we were wiped out. The Zovari Empire destroyed our world, killed millions. She swallowed hard. I was one of the last survivors. Ethan felt a heavy weight settle in his chest. He had heard of the Zovari Empire, a ruthless galactic power that crushed entire civilizations for their resources. Lyra continued, her voice shaking. I was captured, sold, used. They experimented on me, trying to unlock my abilities. They wanted my DNA to create weapons. Ethan stiffened. Weapons. Lyra nodded. My kind, we were born with something inside us, a connection to the universe, to energy itself. She hesitated, then looked at him. What I did back there, I didn't mean to. I just reacted. Ethan remembered the look of pure terror on the bounty hunters' faces when Lyra froze dreadful. Whatever her ability was, it wasn't just rare. It was feared. He ran a hand through his hair. So let me get this straight. The most powerful criminals in the galaxy want you because you can. What? Control people. Lyra's eyes flashed. No. She exhaled shakily. I don't control people. I control their fears. Ethan's stomach twisted. That explained why Drek had collapsed, why the hunters had backed off. She didn't just freeze him. She made him live his worst nightmare. And that kind of power, that was worth killing for. The cost of survival. Ethan sighed, pushing off the console. Great. So not only do I have a bounty on my head, but now I'm harboring the most wanted fugitive in the galaxy. Lyra flinched. She started to stand. I shouldn't have let you save me. I'll leave at the next station. Ethan scowled. Yeah? And where exactly will you go? Back into another cage. She hesitated. He shook his head. Look, I didn't risk my neck back there just to let you walk into another death trap. His voice softened. You don't have to run alone anymore. Lyra stared at him, surprised. No one had ever offered her kindness before. No one had ever fought for her without expecting something in return. For the first time in years, she wasn't alone. But before she could respond, a loud alarm rang through the ship. Ethan's blood turned to ice. He rushed to the console. They had been tracked. A fleet of Zovari warships had just entered their sector. And they were coming straight for them. The price of kindness, the bounty on Ethan's head. The ship lurched violently as the warning alarm blared through the cockpit. Ethan gritted his teeth, gripping the controls as he scanned the radar. 5 Zovari warships had just entered their sector. Their sharp black hulls gleamed against the stars like a pack of hungry wolves closing in. They found us fast, he muttered. Lyra stood frozen, her violet eyes locked on the radar. Terror flickered across her face. They won't stop, she whispered. They'll hunt us across the galaxy. Ethan's hands tightened on the controls. Then let's make them work for it. He yanked the throttle. The ship's engines roared to life, blasting them into a sudden dive as the first wave of laser fire sliced through space, barely missing them. The comms crackled. A cold, metallic voice filled the cockpit. Fugitive Lyra 17, you are ordered to surrender immediately. Lyra flinched at the number. Ethan shot her a quick glance. Lyra 17, he asked, dodging another barrage of fire. She swallowed. That's what they called me. Just a number. Ethan scowled. Well, they can take their numbers and shove them. The ship rattled as another shot grazed their wing. The shields were already failing. They needed a way out, and fast. Betrayed for a bounty. A new alert flashed on the console. Incoming transmission from an unknown source. Ethan hesitated, then tapped the screen. A grainy hologram flickered to life, revealing a familiar face. Kara. Ethan's stomach twisted. Kara had been his closest contact in the Outer Rim, a smuggler who had helped him in the past. If anyone could get them out of this, it was her. Ethan. Kara's voice was urgent. I have a way out. There's a hidden jump gate in the Nabari belt. Coordinates incoming. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Why are you helping us? Kara hesitated. Because I know what they'll do to her if they catch her. Ethan exhaled. Maybe they still had a chance. But then, Lyra's entire body tensed. Her fingers dug into the console. Her breathing became ragged. Ethan, she said softly. It's a trap. A cold chill ran down his spine. How do you know? She didn't answer. But he saw it, the distant, haunted look in her eyes. She felt it. Ethan clenched his jaw. Kara, if you were setting us up. Kara sighed, rubbing her temple. I didn't have a choice, Ethan. The bounty on your head is too high. Every hunter, every smuggler, everyone is looking for you. Ethan's pulse pounded. They weren't just after Lyra anymore. He was a target too. Then, the worst happened. Kara's hologram glitched out, and in her place, another figure appeared. A figure that made Lyra stagger back in pure horror. A Zovari commander, his silver exosuit gleaming, his expression calm and cruel. Ethan Kane, you have nowhere to run. The warships closed in. And Lyra knew this was the man who had ordered her entire race to be wiped out. The ship shook violently as they were locked in a tractor beam. Ethan's hands flew over the controls, trying to override the system, but it was useless. They were caught. Lyra pressed a trembling hand to her forehead. Her pulse raced. The world blurred. She had sworn never to use her power again. But if she didn't, they would die. She turned to Ethan. You have to trust me. Before he could ask what she meant, she reached out, and everything went dark. The betrayal, the human heart tested. Everything was black. Ethan's mind felt like it was drifting through an endless void. No sound, no gravity, no ship alarms screaming in his ears. Just silence. Then, suddenly, a flash. A burning city. Ash falling like snow. Shadows of people. No, not people. Aliens. Lyra's kind. Running. Screaming. Dying. And at the center of it all, him. Ethan gasped as his vision snapped back to reality. He was still on his ship, still locked in the Zovari tractor beam. But his pulse was racing, his breath short, his hands trembling. What the hell was that? He demanded. Lyra stood across from him, her violet eyes glowing faintly, her own face pale. I showed you, she whispered. Ethan's chest heaved. Showed me what? She hesitated, then said the words that changed everything. You were there when my people died. A truth buried in blood. Ethan's mind reeled. That's impossible, he shot back. I've never been to your homeworld. But Lyra shook her head. Not physically, but the Zovari. They used you. Humans. She swallowed hard. They bought mercenaries to help them invade. Your kind helped burn my world. Ethan felt like someone had just knocked the air out of his lungs. Mercenaries. Humans. His kind. No, it couldn't be. But the look on Lyra's face told him this was the truth. And the worst part, she still wasn't trying to hurt him. She just wanted him to know. The ship jolted violently, bringing Ethan back to the present. The Zovari warships were pulling them in closer. Red warning lights flashed across the cockpit. They had minutes left before capture. We need to get out of here, Ethan growled, shaking off the shock. Whatever past you saw, I'm not them. I'm not one of those mercs. Lyra studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. And this time, when she reached for his hand, he didn't pull away, breaking the unbreakable. Ethan didn't know what she was about to do. But he braced himself as Lyra closed her eyes, pressing her other hand against the ship's control panel. The air inside the cockpit shifted. The lights flickered. The temperature dropped. It felt like reality itself was bending around them. Then, the tractor beam shattered. Alarms screamed through the Zovari warships. Sparks exploded across their control systems as an invisible force ripped through them. Ethan's ship lurched free. "What the hell did you just do?" he asked, gripping the controls as he steadied their flight. Lyra opened her eyes, and for the first time, Ethan saw a hint of fear in them. "I broke the connection," she whispered. "But they'll come after us. They'll never stop." Ethan didn't hesitate. He punched in the jump coordinates and slammed the throttle. The ship surged forward, vanishing into hyperspace. For now, they were safe. But the Zovari had seen what Lyra could do, and now they would never stop hunting her. The final stand. A human against the galaxy. Hyperspace stretched endlessly around them, a swirling tunnel of blue light. The ship hummed softly, steady and quiet. But inside the cockpit, the silence between Ethan and Lyra was anything but peaceful. Ethan sat in the pilot's chair, staring blankly at the control panel. His mind was a storm of unanswered questions. Lyra stood nearby, arms wrapped around herself, as if trying to hold back memories that refused to stay buried. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "So, are you going to tell me what the hell just happened back there?" Lyra hesitated. "You wouldn't understand." Ethan let out a bitter laugh. "Lyra, 5 hours ago, I thought you were just a runaway slave. Now, I find out you can shatter tractor beams with your mind, and that my own species might have helped kill yours." He shook his head. "Try me." Lyra exhaled slowly. Then she finally spoke. "I didn't just break the tractor beam," she said softly. "I reached into their minds. I showed them something." Ethan's stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" She looked up, her violet eyes filled with something dark and painful. "I made them see what they fear most." Ethan swallowed. He remembered the way the Zovari ships had spun out of control, the sheer chaos of it. "They panicked," Lyra continued. "Their minds collapsed under the weight of their own nightmares. Some of them won't wake up." Ethan stared at her. She wasn't boasting. She wasn't proud. If anything, she looked afraid. Afraid of herself. "So, what? You're telling me you can just control people's fear?" Ethan asked. Lyra shook her head. "Not control." She hesitated. "I can. Unlock it. Let them drown in it." Ethan exhaled. This was bigger than he thought. Because if Lyra could do that, if she could break the minds of trained soldiers with just a thought, then it wasn't just the Zovari hunting her. Someone else would want her too. And he had a sick feeling that the worst was yet to come. Nowhere left to hide. A sharp beeping interrupted Ethan's thoughts. His eyes flicked to the radar. A distress signal. Not theirs. Someone else's. Lyra tensed. "It's a trap." Ethan nodded. "I know." But he also knew something else. A distress beacon meant survivors. Someone in trouble. And despite everything, he wasn't the kind of man who ignored a call for help. "I'm bringing us in," he said. Lyra's eyes widened. "Ethan, no." Too late. The ship dropped out of hyperspace, the stars snapping back into focus. And there, drifting in the vast blackness, a broken vessel. Smoke billowed from its engines. Its hull was torn open, metal curling outward like the ship had been ripped apart from the inside. Ethan's blood ran cold. This wasn't a distress call. This was a warning. And before he could react, something massive moved in the darkness. The hunter in the void. It came from nowhere. A black, invisible predator, its outline barely distinguishable against the void of space. A ship. A creature. Something in between. Then, the comms crackled to life. A voice spoke, distorted, mechanical. "Surrender the girl." Lyra's entire body went rigid. Ethan's fingers hovered over the weapons system. "And if I say no?" The voice chuckled. A low, unnatural sound. "Then you'll die screaming." Ethan barely had time to react before the thing fired. A pulse of dark energy ripped through the space between them, and the ship's shields collapsed instantly. Ethan cursed, gripping the controls. "Hold on." The ship spiraled, alarms flashing red. Lyra grabbed the edge of the console, her breath coming fast. "It's not so very," she gasped. "It's worse." Ethan growled. "What the hell does that mean?" She turned to him, her face pale. "It means," she said, "that someone else knows what I can do." The ship shook violently. The void closed in around them, and Ethan realized this wasn't a bounty anymore. This was an execution. Freedom, a new beginning. The ship shuddered violently, alarms screaming as the dark entity in space closed in. The thing, whatever it was not so very, not human, not anything Ethan had ever seen before. A predator, something beyond technology or flesh. The voice crackled over the comms again, distorted and wrong. "Give us the girl." Ethan's pulse pounded. He didn't know who or what was after Lyra anymore, but he knew one thing. He wasn't handing her over. He gripped the controls. "Over my dead body." The void responded. A pulse of black energy surged toward them. The ship's systems flickered, shields down, weapons offline. They were defenseless. Ethan swore under his breath. "This is bad." Lyra stepped forward, her eyes glowing bright violet, her hands trembling. Fear, desperation, rage. "This thing, it's not just here for me," she whispered. "It's here for everything I am." Ethan looked at her. She was afraid, but she was also done running. Then she turned to him. "Ethan," she said, "do you trust me?" His jaw clenched. "Yeah," and before he could say anything else, she reached out and touched his forehead. The universe exploded. The final fight. The power within. Suddenly, Ethan wasn't in the cockpit anymore. He was everywhere. His mind stretched across the stars, across time itself. He saw memories that weren't his. Lyra's past, her people's destruction, the experiments, the pain. He felt the weight of her loneliness, the burning hunger of the things that hunted her. And then he saw it. The truth. The thing in the void. It wasn't after her. It was after what was inside her. Her people were never just victims. They were the first line of defense against something ancient, something terrifying. And now, Lyra was the last. Ethan snapped back into his body. His ship was still crumbling. The void was still closing in. But now he understood. "You're not just running," he said, breathless. "You're fighting something bigger than all of us." Lyra's hands glowed. "I can end this." Ethan looked at her, truly looked at her, and he saw a warrior. She turned to face the dark entity. And then she unleashed herself. The moment that changed everything. The ship trembled, but this time, it wasn't breaking. Lyra stepped forward, her body radiating pure, untamed energy. The darkness around them shrank back, recoiling like a wounded beast. The voice screamed. Ethan could barely breathe. The cockpit filled with light, violet, blinding, endless. Then, suddenly, silence. The dark entity was gone. Vanished. Nothing but empty space remained. The alarms stopped. The ship was whole again. And Lyra, she collapsed. Ethan caught her just before she hit the ground. Her breath was shallow, her skin pale. But she was alive, and the monster was gone. For the first time in years, she was free. A new beginning. Hours later, Ethan sat in the pilot's seat, staring at the stars. Lyra was resting in the co-pilot's chair, her breathing slow but steady. She had saved them. She had saved herself. Ethan exhaled. "So, what now?" Lyra opened her eyes, looking at him. For the first time, she smiled. "We go somewhere the stars can't find us," she whispered. "And we live." Ethan smirked, pushing the controls forward. The ship soared into the unknown. Not as fugitives, not as prey, but as something more. Survivors. And for the first time, they were free. The end. What this ending delivers. Emotional closure. Lyra finally stops running. High-stakes battle. The dark entity is a bigger mystery, leaving space for sequels. A satisfying conclusion. Ethan and Lyra leave together, free to start a new life. The ultimate sacrifice. The ship hurtled through hyperspace, its engines burning at maximum speed. The glowing streaks of distant stars blurred through the cockpit window, but inside the cabin, time stood still. Daniel sat frozen, his arms wrapped protectively around his son, his child, his miracle. But miracles weren't supposed to be this dangerous. The baby had rewritten reality, bending space itself to protect them. And now, the entire galaxy knew he existed. Across from him, Servan stood silent, his golden eyes unreadable. The words he had spoken moments ago still echoed in Daniel's mind. I have seen only one other being with power like that. A god. Daniel's chest tightened. No, that wasn't possible. The Zharniks were warriors, conquerors, but they weren't religious. If Servan was comparing his son to something divine, then this was bigger than anything Daniel had imagined. Nowhere left to run. A sudden alarm blared through the ship. Daniel snapped his head up. What now? Servan's fingers flew over the controls. His expression darkened. They found us. Daniel's stomach dropped. How? We just jumped. Servan turned to face him, and in his gaze, Daniel saw something that made his blood run cold. Acceptance. They were never tracking the ship, Servan said quietly. Daniel felt his breath hitch. They were tracking him. His gaze dropped to the baby in his arms, his son. They would never stop hunting him. Never. A father's nightmare. Outside the ship, reality shattered. The deep void of space ripped open, revealing a Zharnik's mothership unlike anything Daniel had ever seen. It was enormous, a floating fortress, bristling with weapons and shrouded in energy that cracked and pulsed like a living thing. And then, a voice. A deep, resonant hum that shook the ship's walls. Surrender the child. Daniel's arms instinctively tightened around his son. No, he wouldn't. He had lost too much. He wouldn't lose him. Servan turned toward him, his expression hardening. Listen to me, Minor. There is only one way out of this. Daniel's eyes narrowed. If you're about to suggest handing him over, I swear to. No, Servan interrupted. I will not let them take him. Daniel exhaled sharply. Then what are we supposed to do? We can't outrun them. Servan took a slow breath, and when he spoke again, his voice was final. I will buy you time. The ultimate sacrifice. Daniel's stomach dropped. No. Servan's golden eyes met his. Steady, unshaken. It is the only way. Daniel shook his head. That's suicide. Servan gave a faint, bitter smile. I was dead the moment I betrayed them. Outside, the mothership charged its weapons. Surrender. Servan reached for the ship's control panel and activated the manual override. A hatch hissed open. Daniel's pulse pounded. What are you doing? Servan turned to him, his towering form casting a long shadow over them. You will take the escape pod. The child must live. Daniel's breath caught. This wasn't happening. He had already lost Vela. He couldn't lose Servan too. There has to be another way, Daniel pleaded. Servan shook his head. Go. Outside, the enemy ships swarmed closer. Final warning. Servan reached down, one last time, and touched the baby's forehead. For a brief moment, his golden eyes softened. Then he turned back to the control panel and slammed his fist down. A deep rumble shook the ship. The engines flared wildly. Daniel barely had time to react before he felt himself being yanked backward. Into the escape pod. The doors slammed shut. Daniel screamed, pounding on the glass. Xirvan, don't do this. Through the viewport, Servan stood tall, unmoving. And then He smiled. The last thing Daniel saw before the pod launched was HFY, walking straight toward the enemy. Alone, unarmed, ready to face his fate. The end of a warrior. The escape pod rocketed away from the battlefield. Daniel's eyes burned as he watched HFY's ship ignite in a blaze of fire and energy. The mothership fired. A beam of pure, searing destruction tore through the ship. Daniel felt it. A loss so raw, so unbearable, it stole his breath. HFY was gone, but he had given them something priceless. Time. A new beginning. And a terrifying truth. Daniel clutched his child to his chest, his heartbeat wild. The escape pod drifted through space, undetected. For now, he looked down at his son, the last thing he had left. The child's eyes fluttered open. And this time, Daniel saw something new. Power. Ancient, beyond understanding. A force unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. His son had changed, and Daniel knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning.